Hi, this is Leland Sklar here, and you are listening to Musicians on the Record, and it is a great place to listen. So check it out and go for it.
1, 2, 3, 4. This is huge, Musicians on the Record. Bring it on.
Hi, welcome to Musicians on the Record. I'm David Ward. This is the show where we get the musician story, and we are going to have a lot of fun today. Legendary bassist Leland Sklar is on the show. Hi, Lee. Welcome to the show.
Hi, David. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for your time. I'm a big fan, and, I'm just going over your discography with my research to interview you. And I'm like, my God, man, this is like the soundtrack of our lives and some of my favorite albums. JT, James Taylor, Jackson Browne, Phil Collins. It's unbelievable.
It's been a great run. I can't complain.
Yeah, it's incredible. And so you had mentioned you just got off the road from South America with Phil Collins?
Yeah, we did South America, Mexico, and Puerto Rico.
Wow.
And it was fabulous. This guy, he's still filling stadiums.
Amazing.
As a solo artist.
Yeah.
It's really amazing. It was great. So.
Yeah. And so how is he doing? I know he's been pretty public health-wise, some issues. Is he drumming at all?
No, he's not drumming.
No.
His son Nicholas is our drummer now, who just turned 17 the other day. And he is absolutely killing it. I've known Nick since he was born.
Yeah.
And Nick was a badass little drummer when he was 4.
Wow.
So, it's a trip for me on stage to be turning around and looking behind me and seeing Nick there. And it's got to be unbelievable for Phil when he looks back and sees his son. But Phil might be able to get away with a little bit of drumming, but at this point, I think the attitude is, the baton's been passed. He's been playing drums for decades, and if he could play up to his own standards, sure. I'm sure he would. But he had some surgeries that injured him more than helped him.
Yeah.
And so it's better for him just to be down front and carrying the show from that seat.
Sure. But it's so great that he is back on the road, because I know he kind of retired a little bit for a while there.
Yeah, we were surprised as anybody that we were back out. Last year we did a week at the Albert Hall, a week in Cologne, Germany, a week in Paris, wow. And then a bunch of other little gigs, around the UK. And the whole thing sold out in like a minute.
Amazing.
Yeah. So I think they're hopefully looking towards the future with more and more work.
Yeah.
We've all got our fingers crossed, right. Band and crew.
Yes. Yeah, and I was wondering, are there more shows that are coming up that you know of?
Nothing. There's things that are being talked about, but nothing that I never talk about anything until it's in absolute,
sure.
Ink.
Right.
So I don't want to disappoint anybody by them saying, well, you said you were going to be here, and then you weren't. So right. Yep. We'll see. Okay. But fingers are crossed.
Fingers crossed, no doubt.
Yeah.
No doubt. What's it like getting ready to play the Royal Albert Hall with Phil Collins or anybody else that you've played that venue with?
Those kind of rooms are interesting to me. It's like Carnegie Hall, and there's a weight of history that sits on your shoulders when you walk into those. It's not like walking into a sports arena, right. And so it's deep. You look on the walls and there's pictures of high-fits and every great classical musician has played in those rooms, and there are tons of people from pop and jazz, and right. So you walk in and you go, no, I better not suck. This is going to be good. But I've played the Albert Hall a number of times now, and it's a beautiful venue to play. I really enjoy it. But I'm really happy. I still go play at people's birthday parties at their houses, So, it's if you're playing music, I'm happy.
Yeah, that's great. When was your last gig, by the way?
Last gig was last weekend.
Yeah.
we played at a place called Bogies, which is up in Westlake Village, north of L.A.
That's great. And
the band is actually myself, Russ Kunkel, Danny Korchmar, Waddy Wachtel, and Steve Postel. And Danny got a record deal from a label in Japan.
Wow.
And so we did his record, and it's basically all of his songs that he's written for people like James and Henley and all this, but done the way Cooch wanted to always do them. So we put this thing together, and we also did some of the stuff that Waddy's been involved with. I mean, basically, in this show, it's all these songs from Dirty Laundry to Werewolves of London, and it's all stuff that was either written by, produced, or played by this band.
That's awesome.
So we played this gig, and we're going to Japan for about 2 weeks in June to do a Billboard Live tour and a couple of other gigs. So that was my last gig, was with those guys.
That's
and
awesome.
Then I just went the other day, which wasn't really a gig, but I spoke at a high school up in that area to a class up there.
That's
and,
great.
Discouraged everybody from going into the music business.
Right.
It's over, kids. Get a life.
Right. Yeah, I want to talk with you about that a little later, too, about the music business. But, what you're talking about is, for those who don't know, and please Google Lee Sklar and The Section, this band is The Section, right?
Well, it's an element of The Section. Cooch and Russ and myself and Craig Durgee were The Section.
Yes.
Craig still lives near me, and we still play together. But this is a slightly different version of it. So with having Waddy involved, and then another friend in L.A., Steve Postel, he and Cooch have been doing a lot of writing and playing together. So it's an incarnation of a section of The Section.
Right. That's great.
We should just call ourselves the Vivisection.
That's great. I had the distinct pleasure at this past NAMM show 2018, and I hope they do more of this. You guys, as The Section, sat down and did the classic, the story behind the album of Jackson Browne's Running on Empty, because you guys did it. I had no idea that you guys recorded this album on the road, in buses, in hotel rooms. Can you say a little bit about what you remember about that time and recording that album?
Well, it was magic. I mean, first off, it's probably one of the few live albums that when you listen to it, it's 100% live. I mean, there's been so many other live albums that they go in the studio and tweak and mess with, and ultimately end up the only live thing is the audience.
Right. Yes.
But we really did. We had remote gear with us the whole time, so we were recording on the bus. We were recording. We tore apart a hotel room. I had my little bass amp underneath the desk as a bass trap. We took the bed apart and set the box spring and the mattress against the wall and made a drum booth out of it. Jackson was in the bathroom singing.
It's unbelievable.
It was really kind of like guerrilla warfare. Yeah. There was no real plans. They recorded pretty much every moment of this tour, and it became an iconic album out of it. Yeah. But when you're in the moment, you're not really aware of what history is going to say about it. But it definitely stood the test of time. And to be doing that at the NAMM show, and then also the section was given a Lifetime Achievement Award by the Tech Awards, and Jackson was given the Les Paul Award. Right. So they had us come in the evening and play with Jackson. And that's the first time the four of us and Jackson had played since, I think, his 50th birthday party.
Wow.
Which was a while back, or 40th birthday maybe. Who knows?
Amazing.
It's been a long time.
Sure. Yeah. That's
very special memories that continue to be developed out of this.
Right. And so all analog back then, right? All analog tape. Yeah. And was it right in the room, the recording equipment, or did you have a mobile truck?
We had a mobile.
Mobile.
Sometimes we recorded, like when we were on the bus. We did some stuff with just a little unit on there, but Greg Ladani engineered it, who passed away a few years ago. And Greg was an amazing engineer, so he's one of those guys that kind of take any situation and figure out how to make it work.
Right.
And but most of it was done with a remote truck with a 24-track machine.
Wow, incredible. Just incredible. Yeah. There's so much discography that you have. We won't be able to get to all of it today. So.
Yeah, please. I'll be an old man with a long gray beard by the time we finish that.
You'll be Gandalf by then. I understand. I don't want to take all that time. But let's talk a little bit about how your story of music even began and why the bass. When did you fall in love with music in the first place?
Well, I mean, it's really funny. When I was a little kid, and some people that listen to the show will remember him, and others won't know, and they can just Google him up. But a big deal when I was a little tiny kid was the Liberace show.
Sure.
And Liberace was a wonderful pianist, but he was like Elton before Elton ever dreamed of. Before Elton was even conceived, there was Liberace.
Right.
And he had a TV show, and when I was at like 4 years old, I would sit and watch the show with my parents, and I fell in love with the piano, and we had a piano in the house, so I took an interest in the piano and started studying, and for the most part, I was a classical snob child, and I studied piano and was actually got a lot of accolades and stuff throughout my childhood, but when I was 12, I went into junior high school, and kind of walked in with the attitude, ta-da, your piano player's arrived. And the music teacher, whose name was Ted Lynn, said, basically looked at me and he said, look, there's like 50 kids here that play piano. We need a string bass player. And he pulled an old blonde K out of the back room, and he showed it to me and showed me how to hold it. And as soon as I plucked a note and felt that vibration, I just looked at him. I said, so...
Wow.
And, he gave me some rudimentary lessons on it, and I kind of left piano at that point. I just said, I'm done with this, because I was kind of stressed out with it, and I'd been under a lot of pressure with it. So bass took over, and within a couple of years, I was in a bunch of bands. I took some private lessons. I took more lessons as the years went on, but this was still pretty early. It just kind of became everything to me, never thinking it would be a career, ever. I was in college, and I was a science and art co-major, and I thought I might be a medical illustrator or a technical illustrator or an oceanographer.
Wow.
But I was always in bands, always playing clubs, and I was sometimes in 4, 5, 6 bands at a time, just to be busy. And in one of those bands, which was called Wolfgang, at the end of the 60s, our drummer had a friend. Our drummer's name was Bugs Pemberton, and Bugs actually was a British drummer who was in Jackie Lomax and the Undertakers, who were rivals to the Beatles back in the day in London. I mean, Jackie was like a matinee idol, and this guy was like as good looking as a guy can possibly be. But Bugs moved to L.A. and he had a friend named John Fishback, and John Fishback owned a recording studio called Crystal, where we did Jackson's first record and lots of records. And John produced and engineered all the early Stevie Wonder stuff. But John he used to come and hang out at our rehearsals with Wolfgang. And one time he brought a friend of his who had just gotten back from England, and it turned out to be James Taylor. And so we were hanging with James, and James came by a couple of our rehearsals, and he got offered a gig when his first album, which he had just done in England, was coming out. And he got offered a gig at the Troubadour, and they remembered me, and they needed a bass player, and they called and asked if I'd play this gig.
Wow.
And to a certain extent, I'm still on the gig, half a century later. I mean, it's just so weird, how things happen, because it's not planned. It was so organic the way my whole career came together. So here I sit.
Right. But
it's culminating with talking to you. Because after we're through, what else can I do?
It's the top of the mountain, Ma, right?
Absolutely. I've reached the pinnacle.
Well, hopefully there's more. But what an incredible thing, though. But that was still part of you, though, too, Lee, that you were playing and working your chops and networking with people and being a good hang, that JT remembered you and said, I want that guy.
Yeah.
That's
no,
awesome.
it was like the perfect storm. It all came together so perfectly. And just my expectations never were that. It's always kind of strange when you talk about music, and it's always referred to as playing.
Right.
You know, in the same way, a little bit like being an athlete. You know, you're playing.
Right.
It's hard to realize that you can actually amortize that into paying your bills and doing all these things. Yeah. So it kind of caught me off guard. And when I went in when I started working in the studio, my very first project after James was Brian Hyland, being produced by Del Shannon.
Oh my God!
So that goes way back. And but when I started working in the studio, we were like the next wave after the Wrecking Crew guys were at their zenith.
Yes.
And when to turn the clock back a little from that, in 1967, I was in a band called Group Therapy.
Oh, I love it.
And we got a record deal, and our producer was Mike Post.
Okay.
Now, Mike Post at that time was the musical director for the Andy Williams show, and he had just done Classical Gas with Mason Williams. Yeah. So we get this record deal. We go in the studio. Well, we're not allowed to play on it. We're too inexperienced. We're a young band. So I look in the window of the recording studio, and I see Hal Blaine and Carol Kay, and the entire Wrecking Crew was in. It was a huge group. It was a big production thing. And I was looking at these guys going, I'll never do that. And that was 67. And by 70, I was working with most of those guys every day. It was just like the fastest turnaround. But becoming a studio player was really a profound experience, because I had never really been in the studio except to cut a couple of demos with bands. So to figure out how to craft the sound, just the etiquette of the studio really was kind of like grab the seat of your pants and start going for it.
Right.
So it's been an interesting adventure throughout these millennia that I've been doing this now.
Can you share a little bit of those?
No, absolutely.
Okay, nothing. All right, moving on then.
I would have to kill you. No.
Some of that etiquette, those learning lessons, that learning curve you got in the studio. I mean, my God, you started playing with the Wrecking Crew. What did you learn in those moments?
Well, so much of it was things just like professionalism. You know, if it's a 10 o'clock downbeat for a session, you show up at the studio at 9:15, 9:30, get yourself situated, tune. At 10 o'clock, they're going to want to start playing. It's not like you're pulling in the driveway at 10 o'clock. Finding your place, you know, hanging with the other guys. If you don't know some of the other guys, you introduce yourself, you talk to them, you create a camaraderie. When you cut a track, and I still believe all of these things, when you cut a track, you go in and listen to the playback. You don't just sit there on your phone now, or it's more than just physically playing the notes. It's an engagement, and make suggestions, be involved, and so there's been like a lot of little things like that. Just juggling schedules, especially back to the 70s and 80s. I mean, we were sometimes doing 4 to 5 dates a day, 6 days a week.
Wow.
I mean, it was staggering. So I mean, I look back at date books, and they look like a chart, like sheet music to a Stravinsky piece or something. It's like it's insane.
Yeah.
But amongst all that is where all of the relationships developed with all the other musicians, and it's a magical community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Some really amazing characters and talents and pant loads and a little of everything.
Right. Some of those characters, I'm wondering, can we talk a little bit about? Going over your discography, I didn't realize you were on the last Doors album in '72 after Jim had died, Full Circle. Yeah. Can you say a little bit about what was that like working with the three remaining Doors, and where they must have been maybe struggling? I'm imagining, but maybe not. I don't know.
Well, the thing that was funny was L.A. was such a vital town through the 60s, and I remember going and just seeing the Doors playing in clubs. Yeah. I'd go see Jimi Hendrix jamming, and all these people, CTA back before they were Chicago and stuff. So, to go in the studio with those guys there was a slight familiarity, even though I hadn't met them. I knew who they were and everything. And it was really nice. I had a fondness. I wasn't the biggest Doors fan in the world. I thought Jim was a great front man for the group and everything. But to sit there with Krieger and Densmore and Manzarek was really cool. I still find myself like that when it's people that I consider somewhat iconic. Yeah. I'll sit in a room and pinch myself and go, wow. If I'm at a place and Robert Plant or Clapton come walking in and they go, hey, Lee, how you doing? Right. I go, how the hell do they know me? Right. It's like one of these things. Phil Collins is still like that. Yeah. Phil carries a camera with him, and if he meets a celebrity, he asks them, can I please have a picture with you? And they're creaming at the thought that that's Phil Collins. Right. So being with those guys was really cool. It would have been fun to have played live with those guys, but it was always keyboard bass when they went out. Ray would use that old Fender little keyboard bass and play the crap out of it, so they didn't really need to have a bass player. But it would have been fun to have experienced that with those guys.
No doubt. And I'd heard when Jim was alive, they'd almost brought in a bass player for the band, and they certainly recorded bass in the studio. Yeah. Right? On those albums. Yeah.
Yeah, they used real bass on the albums, but for some reason that was just their team, when they went out, and good for them. Right. Why not?
It worked, right? It worked. Yeah. Just going back for a minute too, Lee, when you were coming up in those bands, who were you listening to? Who inspired you musically, whether your favorite bassists or musicians in general?
Like I said, when I was studying piano, through most of that, I was a classical player. Then I kind of moved into jazz a little bit. It really wasn't, like for so many guys, I wasn't a big Elvis fan. I wasn't a big Beach Boys, West Coast fan. It wasn't really until the Beatles hit and the English invasion took place that kind of turned my head around and got me thinking in a different way. It was not so much arrogance on my part in those days. I just knew what I liked and what I didn't like. Right. But with the advent of the Beatles, it was a real head changer. And the thing that was funny was when they played the Hollywood Bowl, I tried desperately to get tickets to go see them. I wanted to see what these guys were all about, and I was notified that they had sold out and they, I couldn't get in. But the year before, I had applied to be an usher, and I get this call and says, we have a special concert coming up and we need extra ushers. Are you available? And I ended up being an usher at the Beatles.
Wow. That's fantastic.
And when I met McCartney, I told him that story. He got a big kick out of that. That was actually there.
That's great.
But, those guys, so many of the guys through that period were really great players. Right. That came out of the English invasion. And then I was totally like Hendrix and Cream and, all the groups that came out of kind of the hard rock side of that whole period that evolved from that. But I've never really, like McCartney had an effect on me as a melodic bass player, and made me think. But the real thing that made me kind of craft what became, I guess, considered part of my signature, the melodic aspect of the playing, really was James Taylor. Because when we started, James is a profoundly underrated guitarist. And when he's playing, he's always got this thumb playing bass. Right. And when I started working with him, I kind of sat there and I went, I can either just copy what he's doing and double it, or I've got to figure out some way to weave around it because he's not going to change. Right. And so I really kind of learned how to dance around melodies. And it was great in those days because when we would learn new song, all it would be was James would come in, sit down with his guitar and play, and then we would figure our parts out. Where nowadays, so many people come into a studio with their demo that they just spent 2 years working on, and they refine every note of it, and they're completely married to it. So your opportunity to do much with it is pretty limited.
Right.
And I always love it when guys say, man, you were on my mind when I created this. You're the guy I was thinking of. And then they play it for me. I go, not in a million years would I have ever played. I don't say that to them, but I'm sitting there thinking, really, this is your idea of what I do, and you're kind of stuck having to do it for them because that's what they,
right.
Right.
So just to help those folks when they hire you, how would you describe their playing, or your playing, and what they need to do to be ready for you?
In an ideal situation where somebody's put together just a basic chord sheet of their song, if there's a very specific line that you think is important or you want to make sure that I play, then we'll stop and notate it. Yeah. But for the most part, if I show up and there's nothing there, the guy starts playing, a lot of energy is being spent just trying to suss out the changes.
Sure.
If they can give you just, even if a thing says, it doesn't even have to designate the value of the chord. My ears can do that.
Right.
Just put C, F, A flat, just kind of structure it so that as I'm looking at it and learning it, I can wrap my head immediately around kind of the song and what to do rather than trying to learn this thing and sketch it out.
Right.
But, that doesn't always happen. I get the whole gamut. I get it from nothing to absolutely everything. Yep. When I go to Nashville, I get number charts and learned all that whole system. Sometimes I'll show up on a date and the copyist is screwed up and they've written the bass parts in treble clef. But coming from piano, I can read treble clef, so it's not an issue.
Okay, great, excellent.
But basically, just make sure that the check's going to clear, and when food arrives, put your card down.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. And
that's about all. That's my only needs, I think.
Right. And no brown M&Ms in the dish, right?
So I love the brown M&Ms. Okay. I love them. Only brown.
Only brown M&Ms. Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So that's an important piece too, to have. Sort of that, like the house, you have a framework, but you want to decorate it. You want to put your own voice and the music is creativity, right?
Yeah, it's especially in the old days, when there would be 4 to 6 guys in the room, then you'd really have juices flowing. Yeah. And interesting ideas, and like a guitar player might play a lick, and then I would say, "What was that? Let me double that with you." Or we would sit there and you'd go, "That intro could be more of a hook," or "This song needs a bridge," and everybody would throw in ideas. So much of my work now is just going to somebody's house, and just overdubbing bass on stuff they've already got, and that just limits me. Ultimately, it limits me to just the bass part. I can't do any more than affect the bass part. So I kind of miss that aspect of it, but it's a process, and everything is tools and I still, more and more now in this day, there's more and more sessions being done with, other musicians on the date.
Okay.
And people are actually using studios and not just their garage.
Right.
Not to denegate a garage, because some of the best projects I've ever worked on have been. I was in a band in '93 called Barefoot Servants, which if somebody wants to Google up Barefoot Servants, if that band had taken off, I would have given everything else up just to do that band.
Wow.
And we recorded the first album at Capitol Records, but the second album we did at Ben Schultz's house, who was one of the guitar players, and he engineered it. Man, it sounds unbelievable. So to me, you could be in the greatest studio in the world with a crap engineer, and it's going to sound like crap. Right. And you could be in somebody's bathroom with a great engineer, and it's going to sound pretty damn good.
That's awesome.
So it's really in the engineer's hands more than anything.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Great.
Yeah.
What makes a good bass player and rhythm section, in your opinion, Lee?
I think to be a really great bass player and to be a really great musician in this business, I think the most important thing is to get over the gag reflex.
How so?
Once you're over that, it opens up worlds of work for you that you never dreamed would be possible.
Okay. Could you unwrap that one a little?
Okay. No, I think, it goes back to the professionalism. I think it requires good ears. You hear the stuff. It's the song and the session isn't about you. If it was, you would be the artist.
Right.
So you listen to the songs and you try to find and craft a part that best accentuates the song. Yeah. And if all it requires is whole notes and half notes, so be it. That's not boring. That's the part.
That's right.
Where a lot of guys think, the more intense it is, if you're doing fusion or stuff like that, it's like that's where you really show what you got. Yeah. I said a whole note can really show what you got. Yeah, it's a whole other ballgame.
Right.
But to me, everything is predicated on the song, and I was fortunate to start with guys like James Taylor and Jackson Browne, who are probably some of the finest songwriters of the generation.
Yeah, wow.
So from the very beginning, I was dealing with incredibly great material and learning how to fit into it. So I've kind of approached everything I've done, regardless of the genre. It's the same. My tone really doesn't even change that much. I try to find parts that kind of weave through the musical community rather than, this is my specific sound for funk. This is my specific sound for hip hop. This is my, I for some reason have found a thing that's become kind of like a common denominator throughout all of it. And regardless if I'm working with somebody from Syria, from Japan, from Argentina, from the States, music's music, so most of what I do kind of fits in, and then it's up to me to adjust to the specific song, the specific moment that we're working with. And then it comes down to the demands of the producer, the artist, whatever.
Sure.
And sometimes I find myself in situations like we were saying a little bit earlier, where their concept of what they want is a little different than what mine is. But they've hired me. They're paying the bill. It's my obligation to give them what they want. Yes. Now, sometimes on a project, I'll do exactly what the producer wants, and then I'll say, look, man, if you can give me one more pass, let me throw out my idea of how I would like. And sometimes they've looked at me and they said, oh, that's great. I would have that's perfect. Thank you. And other times they said, no, I'm kind of, I really like my idea. I go, cool. I just wanted to give you the option.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's just plain silly.
You're hired help. You're hired help at the end of the day.
Right. I get it. But if somebody doesn't want to hear your take on something, that's just plain silly as far as I'm concerned.
No, but that's their call. Sometimes they might say, look, we don't have enough time or anything like that.
Okay.
My personal kind of mantra is everything I do is etched in mud. I know what I might think, but to me, if somebody has other ideas and wants to try something different, fine, go for it. It's all good with me.
Yeah, that's that professionalism that you're talking about, right? Yeah. So, being a drummer, for me, Lee, obviously, we do a couple of Warren Zevon songs in my cover band, by the way, Werewolves of London. Not as good as you, of course, but and Lawyers, Guns, and Money. As a drummer, give me some advice and give some drummers advice, please, of what do we need to do better to listen to you guys as bassists and work better together?
Well, I think it all just comes down to what I said. It's not about you. It's about the music. And I think if you just, I love when I meet new drummers and I get to play with them. And the first thing I do is I just listen to them, and I would like the drummer to do the same thing. And we can connect. That's probably been one of the greatest blessings of my whole career is the other musicians I've played with, and especially when it comes to drummers. I've just worked with so many over these decades, and at one point, each one of them was a new experience, and for the most part, we all hang. We're the rhythm section guys, so we all get on really great and hang really well. And I try to, for myself, I try to figure out where the guy's pocket is. Does he lean on his kick drum a little bit, but the snare sits back a little bit, or is everything in front? Or like when I played with Levon Helm, I'm just thinking, how far back can this sit? And and I would like the drummers to think the same way. Like let's keep eye contact going. Be in communication with each other, even if it's not verbal. But pay attention. When I work with guys, because I'll work with the simplest guys in the world, and then I'll end up, with Vinny or Simon Phillips and guys like this. But I did one project with an artist from South Africa, and I was the only bass player, but there were 3 drummers on it, each one doing 4 songs.
Oh, my God.
And it was Simon Phillips, Thomas Lang, and Charlie Watts.
Oh, my God.
And Charlie said, I'll do it if I can be the first one. Because he didn't want to follow either of them.
Right.
But I'm sitting there having to play through these 3 guys, personalities. Yeah. And it was fantastic. And Charlie hung for the whole project because he just dug hanging, even though his part was over with. Probably one of the nicest guys I've ever met in the music business. Yeah. And but it's communication. It's just listening to each other and trying to just do what's best for that song.
Sure.
And if you hear something, if the drummer hears something that he'd like me to do with him, like if he says, I'm going to do this, let's try to, I listen. And if I suddenly go, how about instead of down, just how about, just kicking out ideas about rhythm, and kick drum, bass, and all that. And as long as the communication pathways are open, it's going to be great. Going to be great.
Fantastic. And can you talk about one of the best drummers that you've worked with in the section, Russ Kunkel, please?
Oh, I've known Russ since '68.
Yeah.
So I mean, we've been friends forever. And the thing I loved with Russ is he and I connected immediately. And if we were doing a project where all they played us was click and maybe like guitar or piano, and we couldn't hear each other. If we went back in and listened to the tape, chances are we caught all the fills together. We just have this kind of symbiotic, unspoken relationship. And Russ is funny. I mean, a lot of times he leans on his kick but sits back on his snare. He's got this style that really has some depth to it. And Russ, I mean, certainly in the section days, Russ can be as fusion-y as anybody out there, but his inclination really is not to be one of these in-your-face drummers. He just really knows how to listen to a song and create the best parts in the same way that Jeff Porcaro was like that too, and Carlos Vega. These guys, they were all about songs, and just setting up grooves and pockets. And I miss those guys, and I love that I'm doing this project again with Russ, because we don't see each other as much as we used to in the old days, and this is facilitating an opportunity to play together again. Right. And it's like those old slippers you find in the closet, you put them on, and you just go, yeah, it's good.
It's very comfy, very comfy.
Yeah.
One of the best albums or artists that you guys did work with was Warren Zevon, and of course, Excitable Boy and that whole album. Can you talk about your work with Warren Zevon and playing with him?
Oh, I loved Warren. Warren was absolutely one of the most brilliant, unique, kind of off-the-wall characters I've ever known, and it was always a treat to be in the studio with him. You kind of never knew what to expect, and you listened to his lyrics, and you just thought, God, this cat is like this. You'd love to be, on the inside of his skull watching the synaptic overload take place there. But I really miss Warren, and I think the 2 guys that handled their imminent demise better than anybody in the world was Warren and Bowie.
Oh, right.
And
right.
Bowie had this kind of whole plotted his whole album, his whole idea of what was gonna be his last time. And Warren was kind of the same way, like when he was on Letterman and he knew he was going to not be there, and you just go, this is deep. This is so he was he was deep but wrapped up in a whimsical kind of paper.
Right.
So
just
miss him. Really miss him.
Yeah, agreed. Just an incredible artist. And did you also tour with him as well as be on the record? No.
No, a lot, the thing is when I look at, when I'm embarrassed enough to have to look at my discography, most everybody on that I never got to tour with.
Okay.
It was always studio work.
Okay.
I've toured with a number of people, but there's just not enough opportunities. And most of these guys, we were very lucky when we were able to juggle between James and Jackson.
Yeah.
But that was a whole rhythm section, and we wanted to do it all, so we had their offices all talk to each other. But it's like, I wanted to go back out with Toto again last year, and I couldn't do it because Phil came out of retirement. So, it's just one of those things, you do what you can, and then you lament what you're not able to do because you want to do it all.
Exactly. Yeah, and there's only so many hours in the day. How did you first get the gig with Phil Collins?
Well, it was interesting. I was doing an album with Lee Ritenour back, I think, around 79 or 80. It must have been, and Phil was the drummer on it. I forget if we did a couple of tracks together on it. And he knew me from James. He was a James Taylor fan, and I knew of him from Genesis and Brand X, because I was a big Brand X fan.
Okay.
And we talked at the session, and I said, man, maybe we'll get to play together and do something together. Then when he got his solo deal, and he was doing his first album and his first tour, he called me to do it, but I was out with James Taylor, and I couldn't do it. So I said, man, I can't do it this time, but, maybe down the pike we can do it. And he called me again in 84 for the No Jacket Required album. And I went to England, and then we hit the road after that and did that. And then the But Serious album. And then we had sort of a parting of the ways through the 90s. And then he called me in 2000 and asked if I could come back. And he was bringing Chester back at that point. Yeah. And then we did the first final farewell tour. Okay. After that, but it was after that he just decided he wanted to be a stay-at-home dad and announced his retirement, and his life kind of went into an upheaval. And I kind of never thought, I knew we'd be friends, but I didn't think we'd be playing music again. And then all of a sudden, like 2 years ago, they called and said, Phil's thinking about coming and working again, and said, would you be available? I said, no shit, I'd be available. And everybody got together, man, and it felt amazing.
Who else is in that band now with you, Lee?
The current lineup is Daryl Sturmer, of course, on guitar, who's one of the finest guitar players there is. Brad Cole on keyboards. Nick Collins on drums. Luis Conti on percussion. We have 4 background singers. Arnold McCullers, who I've been out with James Taylor with, and Lyle Lovett and everybody, but he's been with James since like 76 or 5, I think. So it's Arnold McCullers, Amy Keys, Bridget Bryant came back, and Lamont Van Hook. And then we have just the Vine Street horn section with George Shelby on sax and Harry Kim and Dan Fernero. And Luis Bonilla on trombone, and they're killer. I mean, just absolutely killer. Yeah. And band's just smoking, And we're doing a few Genesis songs in the show, so the crowd's loving that.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So it's great. But Phil basically comes out and just sits on a stool for the whole thing because he's got a condition where his one leg is bad, so it's just easier for him just to sit on the stool, and he addresses it the minute he walks on stage, and we realized at that point all the crowd wants to do is see Phil and hear those songs.
Right. Exactly.
He doesn't have to be running around. He doesn't have to be playing drums. Right. Ideally, it would be great for him because if you met Phil walking down the street and had no idea who he was, and you just said, hi, what do you do? He would say, I'm a drummer. Right. First and foremost, that's in his heart and soul. Sure. He's that before anything else. Yep. But that's the one thing that's kind of been taken away from him, which is really kind of sad. Yeah. Like Steve Lukather, developing tendonitis and not be able to play guitar anymore.
Right.
It's just certain cats.
Sure. Well, it's really great that he is feeling well enough to be back on stage and performing. Doesn't matter, just sit and enjoy, right? So
when you're sitting up there on stage, you look up and you've got upwards of 50 to 60,000 people a night. You've done something right.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Let's talk about that, because you are such an accomplished studio musician. The difference between being in the studio and performing live, and maybe or maybe not dealing with nerves, or was that back in the day, or does that ever come up today?
No, I think it's really just confidence. I mean, we rehearse really hard. We spend a lot of time preparing, so I'm not nervous about it. But certainly crowd size is meaningless, because ultimately you could be playing for 100 people or 100,000. Your visual of the audience is always just those first 20 rows. Pretty much that's who you're playing for. In the same way in a club, you're playing to the people you can see. Beyond that, it exists.
Sure.
I spend a lot of time preparing. I mean, I'm sitting here right now, and I'm getting ready to hit the road next Sunday with Judith Owen, and I've got my practice unit right next to me here. And every night I come in and I play her music. So when we get to the first gig, it's like we've been doing this for ages. If you're confident in the material and stuff, then there's really no reason to feel anything except excitement to go out there and just kick some ass and have some fun. Right. If you're insecure about your preparation, then it's nerve-wracking.
Sure.
It's been hard sometimes. I've been called to fill in on a tour at the last minute. And, it's hard. You just maybe learn 30 songs in 24 hours. Right. Wow. And just, focused on it. And you've had to memorize it because you can't go out there with charts.
Right. Wow.
It's it's stressful. But I know that if I was put in a position where I was told you have to choose between playing live, touring, or doing studio work, I would choose touring.
Would you? Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have a pug?
I do. Bob the pug is right back there. I don't know if you can see
Bob,
him.
But I saw his head pop up.
Here, I'll move this for a second. There he is.
Hi, Bob. I love pugs. Yeah. I love pugs. Yeah, Steve Lukather has a pug named Swing.
Named Swing. That's great.
Swink.
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 Awesome. That's great.
But no, I would always, the thing is, I always kind of look at it in the same way. I love working on cars. Being a mechanic would be fun. Being the driver in the race would be really fun. And I always kind of look at studio work is a process where you can kind of sit and disseminate every note ad nauseum. And, you go out and play live. The minute that note leaves your fingers and your amp, it's done. You're not going to sit there and discuss it and scrutinize it. So I love playing live. I like just the whole attitude of just going out there and doing it and seeing immediately the response from the audience. If something you've done kind of sucks, song-wise, well, we better drop that from the set. That really kind of killed the momentum. Right. But that's really, for me, I prefer live than anything.
So that instant feedback, that energy you get back from the audience, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. What's the hardest thing about touring? On the opposite side.
There's several things. I mean, you miss being home. You miss being, with your family.
Sure.
I miss seeing my wife. I miss, walking the dogs. I miss driving. I miss, working in the yard and doing all that stuff. But I have to say the greatest negative to me, for the major bulk of it all, is the experience of flying nowadays. The airports are such crap. Dealing with TSA nonsense. One place says you can take your instrument on the plane. The next guy says you can.
Really?
You can't. And you're dealing with just so much bureaucracy and bullshit. And when you go through all the screenings and all this, and you realize this is meaningless. This isn't making us any safer. It's just inconveniencing everybody and under the guise of making you, safe. But it's not what's happening there, because so many times, every year they do all these tests, and they have all these guys go through with guns and explosives, and 90% of the time it all gets through. You know, these guys are just, a week ago, a lot of these guys were asking if you wanted fries.
Right.
You know, not to denigrate the TSA agents, but, you know, there's just, it's a gig there, and it's got to be boring as hell after a while. And a lot of times I see my bag go through, and I look at the person who's supposed to be looking at the screen, and they're talking to somebody, and my bag's gone through.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, just the whole, you know, get there hours and hours early to sit around, you know, and stand in lines. It's not, you know, when I started touring, you'd pull up to the airport, walk right to the gate.
Right.
There was no security or anything like that. And you never felt threatened. It's a different world now.
Right.
And so for me, it's the travel.
Sure.
That's the real pain in the ass of all this. If you're fortunate enough, like on the Phil's tour, we had a private plane.
Yeah.
So we didn't have to deal with a lot of that, but people would go, it's like so elitist. I go, but we had 50 crew guys on the plane. We had everybody, and the thought of trying to move this many people through a commercial airport to get to a gig where the flight could be canceled or delayed, you know, you just can't take those chances. And when you're looking at that many people, ultimately you're really probably not paying anymore to have your own plane than booking all these tickets and all the stuff you have to do. So. So, but that makes it a lot easier on that level.
Yeah,
but not everybody can do that.
Right. But you've earned that perk, right? I mean, that's...
Well, it's not so much even really earn the perk. It's just really the most efficient way to do the business.
Sure.
On it. You know, I'm not, you know, when I go out with Judith now, we're going to be in a Sprinter van driving around the East Coast, and I'm just as good with that. That's not a big deal to me. I'm at the end of each travel experience, I'm going to play music for people and make them happy. Right. That's all that matters. You know, you don't want to be beaten to death. I'm not a 17-year-old that wants to live and sleep in the back of the van with his band buddies, all kind of with your gear and kind of farting away and stuff. You know, there's certain things I'm not going to do at this point.
You've paid your dues, I think, at this point, Lee, right?
Yeah.
So how do you take care of yourself then, whether on the road or when you're home in the studio? What are some of those ways that you take care of yourself?
Diuretics.
Okay, great, excellent.
No, you know, I try to just kind of eat sensibly when I get to a hotel. I try to take the stairs all the time and not the elevator.
Sure.
You know, whenever I can, I go out and walk a lot. At home, I do tons and tons of. I've got an acre of land that requires a lot of work, and I do yard work constantly when I'm here. That's kind of my Prozac. It keeps me calm.
That's great. Love it.
But you know, I stopped eating red meat years ago.
Okay.
And so, like when I'm out there, I'm trying to eat sensibly and you know, stay on top of, you know, just being somewhat healthy.
Right.
And you do the best you can. Not all circumstances are conducive to being well on the road, but you do the best you can.
Right.
But I mean, I'm not patting myself on the back, but I managed to get to this business without ever drinking or doing drugs or smoking.
Wow.
So I've basically been pretty healthy throughout all of it, so I didn't have any monkeys on my back to deal with.
Right. That's pretty important, right? I mean, that has added to...
But it helped me.
Right. Yeah, I mean, and it certainly hurt a lot of other folks, right?
It killed other folks.
Yeah.
You know, that's the real downside when I look back to friends of mine that I've lost over, you know, all the decades. You know, you just kind of go, Jesus, you know, God, I miss those people. And it's a lot.
It is.
You know, when I look back at the gone list, it's a lot bigger than the still here list.
Right. Yeah, that band in heaven must be rocking at this point, right? It's pretty...
But none of these guys went there.
There was a whole nother place. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, if they did, then they lied or they're not the guy.
Right. I love it. That's great.
You want to have a good visual story?
Yeah.
I was working. I worked for many years in L.A. with a producer named Jimmy Bowen.
Okay.
And Jimmy produced. I mean, I would do like Anthony Newley with him and all kinds of, you know, stuff in L.A. But he moved to Nashville, and he basically is the guy that changed Nashville from a place with a bunch of old cowboys with their pants around their ankles into the contemporary music scene that it became.
Wow.
Bowen is deep. A lot of guys down there didn't like him because he was this outsider who came in and this kind of an agitator.
Yeah.
But he had a set rule in the studio that there was no drinks on the console. That was a big deal to him. And so I went down to work one of the times, because I did hundreds of records with him in Nashville from the beginnings of Vince Gill and Patty Loveless and Reba and all these people.
Wow.
So I went in there and I set a Coke can on the console, and he looked over it and he wigged out. He said, "I told you no." I said, "Man, I'm so sorry." Well, I had this with me. I brought along my fake spilled can of Coke.
Love it.
So I set it. Then I set that on the console and had this going right up to the first fader. And he looked over and lost his mind and started to try to move the liquid. And as he pushed it, the whole thing moved. And he was so pissed off at me. It was a classic moment.
Absolutely.
So it was a kick. And Jimmy's still around and kicking. I think he lives in Scottsdale.
Okay. Yeah.
Last time we worked, we did a Merle Haggard record, and I love Merle. I went with Larry London up to his complex up in Redding, California. We did an album up there, and I had done a bunch of work with Merle. And when I first met him, I said it's such in a way, a shame about Okie from Muskogee, because he was like liberal. He was like a leftist. I mean, he was like this guy. And I said, so many guys got directed away from you thinking that was, like this old redneck crap. And he didn't even believe. So we were down in Nashville doing an album. And we finished the first day. And he was real healthy. He was drinking water. He just married again and had a new baby and was doing great. But he sounded really poorly vocally. And I was kind of surprised because he had probably one of the best voices in country music as far as I'm concerned. And when you hear young Merle, you just go, oh, my God, besides looking like a matinee idol, he had this incredible voice. Well, the next morning I came to the studio early and he was there, and he had replaced all his vocals from the previous day and sounded great. And I looked at him, I said, Merle, yesterday kind of sucked, today really great. What happened? And he goes, my singing teeth arrived. He had the wrong dentures and couldn't enunciate.
Oh, wow.
I looked at him, I said, I'll never hear that again.
Yeah, you don't.
And then the weirdest thing is, back around like very early 70s, I did a Paul Anka record, and there was a guitar player on the session named Michael Herndon. And Michael had aspirations of becoming a studio musician. And but really didn't. He was a good player, but he just didn't have it in him. So he disappeared, and eventually he became an oral reconstructive surgeon who lived up in Quincy, California. Well, when I ended up working with Merle, I ended up hooking him up with Michael, who had Merle come to his clinic. He rebuilt all of his teeth for him into permanence.
Amazing.
And he has a Pro Tools studio in the basement of his dental clinic, so they could go down there and Merle could sing and make sure nothing was messing. And then beyond paying him, when Michael I've done a few records with him over the years. He's still a Martin endorsee. Merle did a duet guest appearance on his album for him.
That's incredible.
So this whole world is all these weird little circles that connect. And sometimes it's 30 years before they reconnect and stuff, but they do. It's like rehooking up with Cooch and Russ and the guys in a band that's going on the road.
Right. It's amazing, that whole networking piece, right? So
yeah.
Incredible. Can we talk about the business of music?
No.
Okay, very good. Moving on. How has it changed since you began, the pros and cons, and what advice would you give somebody in addition to don't do it?
It's changed dramatically. I think like when I did this thing the other day at this high school, and one of the kids asked me a question saying, what do you think about artists now? And I said, they're great. I said, there's great artists out there. I hear, I go on YouTube and I see, young artists. My problem at this point is the business. Yeah. In the beginning, everybody kind of felt, if they signed a record deal, they were going to get screwed and it was going to be, get ripped off and all this stuff. But labels had a machine in place that could get you placed on the radio, that moved product and all. Right. And the real problem now is especially with gear that's available, it's so easy to make music. Right. What to do with it after you've made it is the issue. Sure. And that's really, when I was telling these kids, I said, it's really in your corner to figure this one out, because you guys, you've been raised on all this technology. You've got to figure out how to make this work so you can amortize this into paying your bills and not having to look for other things to pay your bills. Right. I've been really blessed. I mean, I've been doing this basically every day since 70, and I've never had to do anything else. This has paid for my life. Yeah. And for most guys now, I'm not sure if they'll have that opportunity. A few will, but not many. Right. With the technology being what it is, it's allowed people to everybody can make a record now. You spend, $1,000 or something and you can put together, kind of a decent little, studio. The experience of being in a real studio with a real band, going and listening to a playback through big power amps and big speakers, there's nothing like it. And so many haven't had that experience, so they don't really know. Another one of my mantras is don't be an old fart. And, because I want to keep working. Yeah. And I don't want to be that guy that's sitting with a bunch of 20-year-olds in the studio going, well, in my day when we were cutting analog, you just sound like an old fart. Right, right. Because they've never heard analog. They really, conceptually, they might have heard of something about it, but they don't know what the sound of a machine rewinding is and all that stuff. But if they ask questions about it, I'm really happy to talk about it. Yeah. Yeah. But it's a different world now. Certain aspects of all of this technology have improved the process. Yeah. I mean, when you want to start editing and saving, you're not looking at the side room with 300 boxes of tape that you've got to go through to find that bar. Right. No matter how well you've logged your information, you can really pretty much just keep piling stuff up. Almost to the point of distraction where you've got too much and you have to start taking this apart. Right. But that's really the difficult part of this business to me now is really how to get your product out there and make people aware. I mean, there's just so many opportunities for people to see you on YouTube. Sure. Not how many late night shows are there, and you see a band on that show. Right. Well, there's 100,000 bands that want that slot, and so it's hard to be real encouraging. But I always tell, like, it was strange the other day doing this thing because it was kind of a general high school thing where the few times I've done clinics, it's for bass players generally or some other, drummer, guitar players will show up. Sure. But I always look at them and I go, the odds of this happening are so infinitesimal for you. But I said, when there's a Powerball, they say the odds are 175 million to 1. And the next day on TV, there's a guy standing there with his big check. So somebody in that room is going to make it. But the odds of making it are, they're more limited than they used to be because certainly in the 70s, labels were signing artists like crazy. Right. And everybody was kind of getting a shot. And some people were fortunate, like you look at somebody like Bonnie Raitt. Yeah. Who believed in her, so they kept recording and losing money on her forever. But then Nick of Time came and suddenly bailed out her entire past catalog, and so it's there's a lot of aspects to this whole thing. Things I do miss. I miss LPs from the standpoint I love the artwork. Yeah. I love being able to read liner notes. Yeah. I love going to a record store and perusing through through the bins. Because that, to me, was your voyage of discovery, where to go on Spotify and all these different other formats, it's really hard to discover things like digging through just a bin that says, under S's, and you find like an album cover and you go, I don't know who this is, but this is pretty cool. Oh, that guy's on it. Maybe I'll check this out. Right. That voyage of discovery's gone. But one of the things that's cool is like being out with Judith Owen when we do our after-show swag table and signing autographs and taking pictures. She's selling more vinyl than anything.
That's fantastic. Wow.
Yeah, so it's interesting to see a certain element of the pendulum has swung back.
Yes.
And a turntable isn't just for doing this song.
That's right.
I can actually listen to music on it. Instead just a nano iPod with buds is your. So it's like watching a movie on your phone.
Right. Exactly. Right. Supposed to be the big screen, right? So
yeah, exactly.
Is there anybody, Lee, past or present, whether still here or gone, that you didn't get a chance to play with, either in the studio, live? Who you
certainly there's a lot of people I would have loved to been able to go out and play a tour. One of the artists I've always really loved, and I've never really had the opportunity, is a guy like Steve Winwood. Yeah. I've been a Winwood fan since the very beginning of his career. And, guys, because I got to work with Spencer Davis and I've known a lot of the people around him, but I didn't get a chance there. For the most part, there's a lot of people that if the opportunity to play with them would have ever come along or does, great. If not, I can't complain about things. So there's people I've worked with where, like I did 2 albums with Andy Griffith. And, I'm sitting in the studio and Andy's sitting right next to me. And on the one hand, we're hanging and playing music and talking, and he's great. I mean, he used to always do music on his show. He had the same guitar he used in Mayberry. Wow. And he ended up winning a Grammy for Best Contemporary Gospel record, because he did, it was all kind of hymnal stuff. Wow. And I'm just sitting there pinching myself going, Christ, this is Andy Griffith next to me. And he told me a great anecdote. Yeah. We were sitting there, and he had this beautiful, thick white hair like he had in Matlock and everything. Right. And he said, looks at me, he goes, who would have thought I'd still have all this white hair and Opie be bald? I almost crapped my pants. I was laughing so hard.
I love it. That's fantastic.
He was great. He'd call me all the time from North Carolina and just, hey, Lee, how you doing? It's Andy here, and I kind of would go, it was worth my whole career for this. Or there's 2 DJs in L.A., Mark and Brian. Their show was huge for years, and they don't do it anymore. But for years they did a Christmas show, and it would be at the Hollywood Palladium, and their show went on live at like 5 in the morning. So I mean, people were lined up around the block in the wee hours, and it was crazy. But they would have all this craziness. And in one of the shows, Donald O'Connor came and sang White Christmas, and Mel Torme was there and did the Christmas song. Wow. And I went back in the dressing room afterwards, and I looked at the 2 of them. I said, if I die in a car crash on the way home, it's okay.
Right.
This was a good one here.
Right. Amazing. It's amazing.
But, when opportunities do come along to play with people, I never say no unless I can't do it, just schedule-wise, or I have a really bad feeling that I'm going to get burned on it. I go with my gut, and it's happened a few times. So I'm leery of some things that sound way too good.
Okay.
But go ahead.
I was just going to ask, could I ask a little bit about that? Obviously, so many highlights that you have, but I'm wondering about some of the challenges or learning lessons that you've had with music in the business. What do you mean by that when you say you got burned?
Well, you just got your checks was bad.
Oh, okay.
You get ripped off, basically. So that would be it. I mean, when you've invested a lot of energy and time into preparing for a project, doing it, and then all of a sudden the check bounces, the guy's not around anymore, and all that leaves you with a real sour taste.
Sure.
So sometimes you just get a feeling in advance. Somebody calls you and you go, I don't think this is kosher. I think I'm going to pass on this one. Okay. But they're few and far between. For the most part, I would say my positive experiences in this business are up in the 90 percentile bracket. So I wouldn't really complain about anything. And there's not a business in the world that somebody isn't going to burn you in. You can't think that.
Exactly.
Also, I get really weary when I would look at guys' interviews like in Bass Player magazine, and it would list their discography, and it's like all the very A stuff, And I'd go, man, if you had a career, you played on everything. So I would always tell people, they'd say, oh, man, all that, like Phil Collins and, Spectrum and all that. And I'd go, yeah, but I played on I Am Woman. Right. I played on It's Raining Men and all these things. I played on Ted Knight's album. It's like, to me, the idea of getting up every day and going to work and playing music with your friends, it doesn't get better than that.
Right.
So
it's pretty incredible. Yeah. So maybe mention an artist or an album that you were on that maybe not as well known, but you feel really good about, really proud about.
I did a bunch of records with Stephen Curtis Chapman, who's one of the top artists in the contemporary Christian field. Man, we didn't necessarily share the same spiritual idea about things, but musically, man, the guy is like ridiculous, and I'm happy he has his path in life, and that's cool. Yeah. With me, I love working on his stuff, and people come up to me, and surprise me sometimes. They'll go, "Oh, aren't you?" They kind of recognize him and say, "Oh, I love your work on," and then they say some album that to me, I go, "You've heard that record?" It's like it seems obscure. Your expectation is going to be that it's going to be like one of the ones that most people think about. But the first question when I played at the high school, when I went over to the high school and talked to them, the first guy that raised his hand said, "You played on Stratus?" You just don't know how things are touching people. So it's a fascinating adventure to me. Yeah. Just every day, it's just like. But there's a lot of things that I've done over the years where never even got released. That were some great records that for some reason the deal fell through or whatever, and I know somewhere that's just sitting on a shelf rotting away.
Oh, ouch!
You go, that's really sad.
Yeah.
And other things really surprise you. I remember when I worked with Vanessa Carlton, we did her album 1,000 Miles. And I walk in the studio, and there's this young squirt sitting at the piano, just practicing the shit out of Chopin. Right. And I'm going, wow, this is going to be good. She's a fine pianist. I mean, she had a big hit with that record. But, it's great when you come into a project not knowing who the artist is or anything like that, and then you walk away just going, wow, this is really a fun thing. Amanda Marshall's another artist I loved working with out of Canada. Yeah. And Google her up, and man, what a voice! And this girl was great, and she's still up, working. But it was one of those things that every once in a while somebody would come up and say, "Man, I love what you played on Amanda's record." And you go, wow, cool.
Yeah, that must feel really good, right?
Yeah, it's just good, and it's good that these artists, I love for them to get recognized. Sure. Steve, the thing for me is I'll go in and go to work on a project and walk out the door and go to another project. For that artist, that time in there might be the only time they ever get a shot. Yeah. So when it gets heard, it's great. For me, my work is a continuum. Mm-hmm. So, I do, I'll go on the road, I'll come off, I'll do a project. We just finished doing tracks for Kristen Chenoweth, a Broadway singer. And every time I kind of turn around, I've got another project to do. So my career isn't predicated on an individual project, where for the artists, it's like it can be live or die for them. Yeah.
When you were first coming up, and even before you met JT, was there an original dream that you had? Was it to be the next Wrecking Crew? Was it to be in a band?
Because when I met James, I was still in college as a science art major, and thought I was going to maybe be, and plus I was doing all I could at that point to maintain my student deferment because it was the height of Vietnam and everything. Sure. So I really didn't think music would be anything for me other than just playing clubs, with friends and looking for a gig that would actually pay my bills and have a future.
Right.
So
That's amazing.
So for me, I never, this all kind of came through the back door.
Yeah.
I didn't have like a plan, for how to lay out my career.
Right.
It was the perfect storm, because if James hadn't come to that rehearsal of when I was in that band,
right,
and I'd never met him, who knows? I'd have probably never had it. It was just, and he was the guy, because he started that entire West Coast singer-songwriter attention.
Sure.
And the fortunate thing was that Peter Asher insisted that our names be on the record. Oh. So when all of these other singer-songwriters were now being signed, they would look at James's record, and it would say Russ Kunkel, Lee Sklar, blah, 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 on it. So they would call us. And next thing you know, I had a career that I didn't even understand.
Right. It's amazing.
Stuff.
Yeah. So even though you didn't have a plan, it sounds like there was a plan for you, which was really great.
Something happened.
Yeah. Right. It's amazing. Yeah. Lastly, then, Lee, I mean, you've had such an amazing career, and there's more to come, obviously. For future folks who are watching this who would like to get to where you
future are, like 1,000 years in the
yes,
future?
in the year 2525. For folks who want to learn from you and to get to be where you are, what advice would you give them?
I mean, it's kind of a hard thing, because the business has changed over the years. But I would say the primary thing is to enjoy making music, enjoy the camaraderie that it creates. If you're fortunate enough to find yourself in a working situation, treat it as a profession and not as a hobby. Really be diligent, like I said in the beginning. Be very be professional about things. Be there. Don't be off in your heads in another place, and because word gets around fast. If you screw up, your career can end real quick, because there's 1,000 guys standing outside the door waiting for your seat. Mm-hmm. But I mean, to me, the real thing was, even if you don't make it as this being your primary source of income, you can still enjoy music, like my friend Michael, who became an oral surgeon, but he still records, makes records, writes songs, and he's a good artist. It just, for him, it wasn't quite right. I did an album a couple of years ago with a guy, and we were talking. Oh crap! I'll let it ring up.
It's all good.
But I was working with this guy, and when we finished the project, I said, "So, what do you do normally? What's your kind of thing?" And he goes, "My brother and I own Skechers shoes."
Oh, wow. And
I've been tons of guys like that.
Yeah, amazing.
That they inherited a medical supply company, a family business, but they're a good artist. Wow. And,
it's great.
You just don't know what can happen in this. But kind of try to just embrace life and experience it, because it all enhances what you ultimately do.
It's amazing.
And that's what it's all about.
Yeah.
I'm touring again with Judith Owen starting on May 6th.
Okay.
We'll be back in New York. We play the Iridium on the 10th. Okay. And then we're doing some New England, East Coast gigs, and then up into the Midwest. We end up in Milwaukee on the 29th, I think. But Judith is fabulous. I love working with her. She's married to Harry Shearer from Spinal Tap and The Simpsons and all that. He's got a new album out because he's Derek Smalls.
That's
right. Smalls Change, his new solo album.
That's right.
But Judith is kind of like if you took, Carole King and Joni Mitchell and all those of that genre and rolled them into one and then put them on steroids. It would be Judith.
Amazing.
So I'm really excited about that. And then June we head back to Japan, like I said, with Waddy and Cooch and everything. Yes. And then there's other stuff lined up for later in the year that I'm not at liberty to talk about yet.
Okay. But maybe with JT or Phil or somebody like that?
No, it might be somebody with initials along those lines. We'll see. But everything's, I can't complain at all.
Yeah.
I just spent 2 solid days doing a ton of yard work. My hands are completely chopped liver. And that makes me happy, too.
That's awesome.
So.
That's really great.
You're not going to ask me about my name and what it means?
Well, actually, that was my last question. What does Leland Sklar mean, by the way?
Well, Leland means little. In Russian, Sklar means glass blower. It's somebody who makes glass. So I was on the road in UK with Judith Owen, and we ended up doing a lot of different. Every town has a BBC studio, so we were doing the whole thing, promoting our album. And we got to this one, and there was this girl disc jockey there, and this isn't denigrating to women because we had great ones too, but this girl DJ who had no clue who Judith was completely ill-prepared to ask any questions, no clue who I was or anything. So we're sitting there, and she's just looking at her notes and goes, "Oh, Sklar, that's an interesting name. What does it mean?" And I said, in Russian, it means glass blower. And she goes, "Well, have you ever blown any glass?" And I said, "Only Philip." And she sat there with this kind of complete vacuous look on her face. I doubt if she knew who Philip Glass was. Judith almost passed out. She was hyperventilating. And, so I love moments like that where you can just take the piss out of somebody. And maybe after we left, somebody might have said to her, you know what just happened on your show.
Right, exactly. And shall we go out with the finger?
I'm not sure if you think about it.
Right. And who is it we're giving the finger to, Lee?
Well, actually, the whole thing with the finger.
Yeah, tell me this story.
Okay, I'll do this real quick.
Okay.
When we were out with Phil Collins doing the final farewell tour, there was talk that he was going to retire. Yeah. And we had like 100 crew guys. I mean, this was a massive tour. And I thought, I may not see any of these guys again. Who knows? And they had hired a bass tech for me, and I've never had a bass tech on a tour. I've always done my own gear. Yeah. So Steve became kind of like a general. Anytime somebody needed somebody, they got Steve. So he and I had a running joke. Every time he'd see me, he said, because he had come off the tour where like it was the bass player had like 10 basses and wanted new strings every night and all this crap. So. I thought, I'm going to take pictures of everybody and make a little folder for the end of the tour. First guy I go up to is Steve, and he's sitting on his computer working, and I go, "Hey, Steve, give me a smile," and he just is sitting there, looks away, and goes. I took the picture, and I looked at it, and I went, "This is actually pretty cool." So I went and got Phil, Tony Smith, his manager, every crew guy, caterers, you name it, all the band, and I put it away, and there was probably about 120 pictures. Wow. In this folder for a couple of years. Then when I went out with Toto, I decided to take pictures with those guys too. It got up to about 300 pictures by the end of their tour. And I'm looking at all this, and I made it my screensaver, so it would just rotate with these pictures. Well, at this point, I'm probably close to 11,000 pictures of people flipping me off.
That's incredible.
And I don't care about this.
Yeah.
What I like is this. When you give people permission to flip you off, you get everything from this to, so it's all. I mean, when I went up to that school last week, I got the whole class to flip me off, and when I asked them to do it, they were thrilled. It was so exciting. Awesome. So I may do a coffee table book of this.
I was just thinking that.
Yeah, but
it's got to be.
The thing is, on the one hand, This is just a gesture. This is no big deal. If there's a smile or anything behind, it's not a big deal. If there's a carload of guys next to you giving it to you on the freeway, there might be some shit going down. And for the most part, if this really had the effect it could have, I would aim it right at Washington and just take down the whole pile. But I'm not going to end this on a dark note because this is why I'm not on Facebook for another 30 days. Okay. I was kicked off 7 times since last summer, because I'm being trolled by people who hate my politics. I mean, I even had death threats on Facebook.
Wow. Sorry to hear it. That's
by these chicken shits that are sitting in mom's. In the basement in their little dungeon down there with their ABBA poster, and they're coming after me.
Right.
Not to denigrate ABBA, I'm sorry, because they're a good group.
Right.
But it's a strange time. But the thing is, I feel fortunate enough that I've managed to play music all over the world, And when you're playing music, politics disappears.
Exactly.
And people enjoy themselves. And for that, I feel blessed that this is part of my life.
Right. Yeah. It really is the universal language. No matter what your beliefs are, you can all get into music. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you, Lee. I appreciate it. And I will send you the picture of us doing that so you can add it to your screensaver. Definitely.
Great.
Yeah.
This
awesome.
only means that to me you're number one.
That's right.
Not number two.
That's
number one.
It's a whole new meaning.
If I do this, you're nothing.
Wow, amazing stuff, Lee. Thank you so much for your time, with being so generous and incredible stories. It's fantastic. I love it.
It's my pleasure.